The room went completely silent when Charles pushed a cream-colored folder across the table and said 6 words Camilla was never supposed to hear. She will take your place. Camilla didn't touch the folder. She didn't even look at the name written inside it. She stared directly at Charles, waiting for him to smile, waiting for someone to admit this was a misunderstanding, a temporary arrangement, anything except what it sounded like. But Charles didn't smile. Princess Anne was sitting 3 chairs away, perfectly still with both hands resting on the head of her walking stick. Prince Edward lowered his eyes. William looked at the folder, then he looked at Camilla. That was when she realized something far worse than the decision itself. Everyone else in the room already knew. The meeting had been arranged for 6:30 that evening inside a private sitting room at Buckingham Palace. No press secretaries, no junior aides, no phones on the table, just the king, his wife, his 2 siblings, William, and a senior private secretary carrying a red dispatch box that had apparently been prepared 2 days earlier. Camilla had been told the discussion concerned the autumn schedule. It didn't. The schedule was only the excuse used to bring her into the room, and the real issue had begun 48 hours earlier when a senior member of the royal household received an instruction that didn't make sense. Several engagements normally associated with Camilla were being reviewed. Not canceled, not postponed, reviewed. That one word traveled through the palace faster than any official announcement could have. Reviewed meant somebody was asking whether Camilla should still be doing them, but nobody knew who had ordered it. At first, staff assumed the instruction had come from William. It hadn't. Then they suspected Anne. Wrong again. The order had come directly from Charles. That was the first shock. The second was buried inside a single handwritten sentence at the bottom of the page. Prepare an alternative. Alternative to what? That question remained unanswered until the morning Camilla's office received a revised draft of the royal diary. Her name had disappeared from 3 major occasions: a diplomatic reception, a military commemoration, a private gathering involving representatives from several Commonwealth countries. In each place where the Queen had previously appeared beside the King, someone had drawn a thin pencil line through the words. No replacement name had been added. Not yet. Camilla's private secretary reportedly asked whether it was a clerical error. The answer came back almost immediately. No error. That should have ended the confusion. Instead, it made everything worse, because Camilla had spent years building her position around one idea. Whatever people thought of her history, her marriage to Charles placed her at the center of royal life. She could withstand criticism. She could ignore old photographs. She could survive every comparison with Diana, but she couldn't ignore an empty space where her name used to be, and someone inside the palace knew it. By lunchtime, Camilla had requested a private meeting with Charles. He declined, not because he was unavailable, because he wanted the family present when he gave his answer. Wait, why would a husband need witnesses to discuss his wife's diary? That was the question Camilla should have asked. Instead, she made a move that pushed Charles from hesitation into action. She instructed her staff to restore the original schedule. No consultation, no delay. Her name was placed back beside the King's on all 3 engagements. Then the revised document was circulated as though the matter had been settled. For almost 2 hours, it looked like Camilla had won. Then Princess Anne received a copy. Anne did not call Camilla. She did not complain to Charles. She took the document, marked 3 sections with a black pen, placed it inside a red folder, then drove directly to Buckingham Palace. What she showed Charles changed the tone of the entire dispute. The 3 engagements weren't random. Each required long periods of standing, detailed preparation, and direct contact with military or Commonwealth representatives. Charles' advisors had been quietly developing backup arrangements in case either he or Camilla became unavailable. But Camilla's office had blocked one particular name from appearing on those backup lists: Anne's. That was when the schedule stopped being about health, timing, or convenience. It became about control. Camilla reportedly believed Anne's inclusion created a dangerous visual. The King beside his sister, the Queen absent, Anne carrying out the duty with the calm efficiency royal watchers had seen for decades. Once the public saw that arrangement work, what would stop the palace from using it again? Nothing, and Camilla understood that before anyone else did. But Anne's folder contained another detail. Camilla's staff hadn't merely removed her name from the latest schedule. Similar changes had appeared on earlier drafts going back several months. Whenever Anne was listed as the first alternative, the position was changed. Sometimes Edward appeared, sometimes Sophie, sometimes the engagement was reduced, but Anne was repeatedly moved down the line. Charles read the documents twice. Then he asked the question nobody in the room wanted to answer. Who authorized this? The private secretary hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Charles closed the folder. The family meeting was called that afternoon. But Camilla still believed she could control what happened next. She arrived early wearing a dark blue dress, pearl earrings, and the expression of someone who had already prepared her defense. She expected an argument over protocol. She expected Anne to accuse her of interference. She expected Charles to soften the matter, protect his wife, then ask everyone to move on. Charles did none of those things. He entered carrying a separate document, not Anne's folder, his own, and William was with him. That was the moment Camilla's confidence reportedly shifted. William wasn't there as a spectator. He had been consulted, not about Camilla's marriage, not about her title, about the future operation of the monarchy. Charles began without anger. That made it worse. He said the crown could not allow personal tension to disrupt the public schedule. He said duties had to be assigned according to experience, availability, and trust. Camilla interrupted. She reminded him that she was queen. Charles agreed. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. This is not about what you are called. It is about who can do the work. Anne looked down. Edward shifted in his chair. William didn't move. Camilla asked whether Charles was questioning her commitment. No, he replied. I'm protecting continuity. That word again. Continuity. It sounded harmless. But inside the palace, continuity means something very specific. It means the institution will keep moving even when an individual can't or won't, or is no longer trusted to control the process. Charles opened the document and explained that the role being reassigned was not Camilla's position as queen. No one could simply appoint another woman to become his wife or duplicate her title. The change was quieter than that, which made it more brutal. Whenever Camilla could not accompany the king at selected public duties, the first senior royal considered would no longer be chosen through her office. Charles would choose personally, and he had already chosen. Camilla finally looked toward Anne. Anne still said nothing. That silence gave the answer away half a second before Charles spoke. Anne will stand in. There it was. Not Catherine. Not Sophie. Not a younger face chosen to soften the monarchy. Anne, the one person Camilla could not dismiss as inexperienced. The one person whose royal position existed long before Camilla entered the family. The one woman who didn't need public sympathy, fashionable photographs, or carefully managed headlines to appear legitimate. Camilla's response was immediate. She said Anne had her own commitments. Anne looked up. I'll manage. 3 words. No speech, no celebration. Just the kind of answer that made resistance look embarrassing. But Charles hadn't finished. That was the part Camilla didn't see coming. He turned to Edward and explained that the decision would require a broader rearrangement of duties. Edward and Sophie would receive additional responsibilities at regional events. William would be kept informed of all changes involving major state occasions. Then Charles placed a second page on the table. Catherine's name was on it. For one dangerous second, Camilla thought Charles had prepared 2 replacements. The truth was more complicated. Anne would become the immediate operational choice whenever experience and authority were required. Catherine, as Princess of Wales, would be prepared for a larger future role as the monarchy moved toward William's reign. One woman would handle the pressure now, the other represented what came next. Camilla was caught between them. Anne behind her, Catherine ahead of her. And suddenly, the title Camilla had fought so hard to secure no longer guaranteed control over the room. If royal stories like this are exactly why you watch the palace so closely, subscribe now because the next part is where the family disagreement turned into something Britain could actually see. The meeting ended without an official announcement. That was deliberate. Charles didn't want a headline declaring that Camilla had been replaced. He wanted the change to appear through action. One event at a time, one photograph at a time, one empty chair at a time. The first test came less than 2 weeks later. A military reception was scheduled in London. Camilla had originally been expected to attend beside Charles, but her office quietly announced that she would remain at Clarence House due to what was described as a demanding week. Nothing unusual there until the cars arrived. Charles stepped out first. Then Anne emerged from the second vehicle in a dark navy coat, a gold brooch pinned at her shoulder. There was no grand declaration, no palace statement explaining what had happened inside the family meeting. Just Anne walking beside the king while cameras clicked. Royal watchers noticed immediately. Why Anne? Where was Camilla? Why did William appear completely unsurprised when he greeted them inside? The palace offered no detailed explanation. That silence did more damage than any announcement could have, because when people receive no answer, they start looking for patterns. They found one. 3 days later, Anne represented the crown at another engagement that had previously appeared on Camilla's schedule. Then Edward appeared at a regional reception Camilla's office had once supervised. Then Sophie was given a meeting that normally would have passed through the Queen's team. The structure around Camilla wasn't collapsing. It was being removed piece by piece. But here's the contradiction. Publicly, Charles continued treating Camilla with warmth. They were photographed together. They smiled. They attended a service side by side. To anyone watching casually, nothing had changed. Inside the household, almost everything had. Important schedule decisions were now being copied to William's office. Anne's availability was checked before Camilla's staff could propose alternatives. Edward and Sophie were being included earlier. Camilla still had the title, but the machinery beneath the title had started answering to someone else. That was the real declaration, not a speech from a balcony, not a document read by a herald, a shift in who received the telephone call first. Camilla understood it perfectly. She requested another private conversation with Charles. This time he agreed, but when she entered, the folder from the family meeting was still on his desk. Camilla asked how long the arrangement would last. Charles reportedly gave no date. She asked whether Anne would now accompany him whenever she was unavailable. Charles said, "Where appropriate," 2 words designed to calm the situation. But they raise an even bigger question. Who decided what was appropriate? Charles did. Not Camilla, not her office, not the advisors who had repeatedly moved Anne's name. Charles. Camilla then asked the question she had avoided during the family meeting. Was this William's idea? Charles paused. That pause hurt more than a denial. William had not invented the plan, but he had supported it, and his reason exposed the fear sitting beneath the entire dispute. William believed the monarchy could not afford to look dependent on any single person's popularity, health, or private preferences. He wanted a working structure ready for sudden change. A structure that included Anne, Edward, Sophie, eventually Catherine. In other words, William wasn't trying to punish Camilla. He was building a monarchy that could continue without her. That distinction didn't make it less humiliating. It made it permanent. But the biggest blow arrived from the one person who had barely spoken. Anne. Camilla reportedly approached her after a private family gathering and asked whether she truly intended to accept every engagement offered by Charles. Anne's answer wasn't cruel. It was worse. "I intend to do what is required." No argument, no apology, no satisfaction. Anne wasn't fighting Camilla for power. She was behaving as though the matter had never been personal at all. That robbed Camilla of the one defense she understood. She couldn't accuse Anne of ambition when Anne didn't appear to want anything. She couldn't call her disloyal when Charles had asked her directly. She couldn't outrank the king's sister inside a duty the king himself had assigned. But there was still one final document, the one Charles had not shown the whole room. William saw it later. So did Anne. It contained the long-term order of support for the crown during major periods of absence or reduced duties. Camilla's name remained where protocol required it, but the practical sequence beneath that name had changed. Anne first for experience, Edward and Sophie for continuity across the country, Catherine for the future beside William. It wasn't a replacement list, it was a survival plan. And the person who had unknowingly made it necessary was Camilla herself. By trying to keep Anne away from the king's side, she had forced Charles to ask what would happen if the monarchy ever depended too heavily on Camilla's office. Once he asked that question, he couldn't unask it. The answer was standing in front of him. His sister had completed thousands of engagements without demanding control of the palace around her. Edward had accepted a quieter position, then continued working. Sophie had built public trust without forcing herself into the center. William and Catherine represented the next reign. Charles didn't need to invent a replacement. The family already contained one, several in fact. That was the twist Camilla never anticipated. She thought the struggle was between herself and Anne. Charles had quietly turned it into a choice between one office and the entire working royal family. There was only one way that could end. Weeks later, another reception took place beneath the chandeliers of Buckingham Palace. Charles entered slowly. Anne walked just behind him, composed, watchful, ready. Edward and Sophie greeted guests across the room. William stood near the center, speaking with military representatives. Camilla's place beside the king remained empty. Not because she had lost her crown, not because another queen had been appointed, but because Charles had finally separated the woman who held the title from the people he trusted to carry the weight. Look closely at that final image. The crown was still on Camilla's head, but the keys were in Anne's hand. Tell me whether Charles was protecting the monarchy or delivering the quietest royal dismissal Britain had ever seen.